Public enemy number one, Anopheles, the malaria mosquito. Wanted for willful spreading of disease and theft of working hours. For bringing sickness and misery to untold millions in many parts of the world.
The mosquito problem varied considerably all over the area. The area 30 miles below Salerno in Italy, it was pretty bad. There were lots and lots of mosquitoes. The mosquito problem in southern France was not that great, more or less a visit to southern France. When we got to Port Leone, Morocco, it was the most variable thing that could happen. For some reason or other, the Sirocco winds would come across the desert, and whenever they would start, we had essentially 3 donkey traps. These were things with kind of V-shaped sides so that you put a donkey in there for the night, and in the morning you could go in with a suction tube and you could suck up all the mosquitoes and you'd get a count of how many were in there, and it would give you some indication of how bad the mosquito problem was. And it would vary tremendously. There were times when there were hardly any mosquitoes around, and again, when the winds came and the conditions changed, why, it seemed like it would really creep up on you. Now, the real problem was the natives actually could get down about 5 feet, dig a hole 5 feet, and they would get water in a lot of places. And then that water would be a great place for mosquitoes to breed and multiply. The problem was that we used diesel oil mainly to control. You can put that on water and it will fill the breathing tubes of the larvae and it will kill them. And you can easily control a mosquito propagation that way. Well, the trouble was we would do this for a place, and the next time we went back, they had dug another well 5 feet away, and so then you had 2 wells. And by the time a couple of weeks had gone by, why, you had 4 or 5 and every time you did that, obviously, it messed up their drinking water too. It was a stupid thing and a dumb way to control that. But that's what we had to do to try to get control. We also sprayed all the native huts and things, and there we had a problem of no strange men could go in there, and so we had to hire women, and we had a truckload of women that we would take around, and they could use the spray guns and things and get in there and soak the huts with that and try to control it that way. The first tools that you can use to control mosquitoes is simply to use a shovel or a rake to get rid of the vegetation and to let the water run off or evaporate so that there's nothing there for the larvae to live in. Flamethrowers were strictly used to burn the brush and the vegetation and stuff so that you could actually clean up and let the water would evaporate or run off, and therefore there would be nothing for the larvae to live in. Now, if you can't do that and the water can't run someplace and dry up, then you have to use number 2 diesel oil. You spray that on the water and it fills the air tubes of the larvae and it'll kill them. Actually, you can do some other things too, and we did. We had a large lagoon near us in Port Leone, and that bred a lot of mosquitoes. And we actually had a Piper Cub, and it was rigged with a spray, and we used Paris green, which I think is an arsenic material, and sprayed that water. That was not a good thing to do because you were essentially poisoning the water, and if there were any fish or anything in there, you were messing it up from the standpoint of maybe what somebody could be eating too. So the other thing is we used a DDT, wettable powder, and we put it in sprayers. And that's what you did, you spray rooms and buildings and things like that. And even our own quarters where we slept under mosquito nets on our bunks got sprayed with wettable powder, DDT, essentially. And we used DDT for just about everything. When we got to Naples initially, there was a typhus outbreak. A lot of people were suffering, and essentially what we did is we lined up battalions blocks long, and we dusted them with DDT from the standpoint of trying to take care of the lice and the typhus and stuff that may have been killing people. So, and essentially, we were told over and over again that you could do everything with DDT, and it was practically non-poisonous from the standpoint of anything. That, you know, it accomplished whatever you were trying to accomplish without any kind of worry about bad effects. We essentially tried to educate all the naval personnel wherever we were. Obviously, in that business in below Salerno, there were the three of us, and we didn't have much contact with other naval personnel. But once we got to Port Leote, we actually did ask people to show up, and we told them what we were doing and how we were doing it and why we were doing it and what they should be doing. And we didn't always get good cooperation. At Port Leote, we had a good CB group. You know, they were the people who had eye problems or something, and they showed up as construction people at most stations. And some of these guys worked with us, and one of them from New Jersey actually worked closely with us, and he ended up not following the directions, and he came back home with malaria. So the thing about that is that wherever we had a group of naval people in the area, we attempted to get them together and emphasize that you could do all this and be safe from malaria. For years and years, people knew that there were trees and things on the South Pacific Island that produced quinine, and that this was something that you could take that would relieve some of the symptoms of malaria. Okay? And what happened was that early on, the Japanese knew this too, and they actually took over a couple islands and took away most of the supply of quinine. And so the next thing, the scientists got busy, and they put some things together, and it was Ataburn, right? And the Ataburn material actually was yellow, and if you took enough of it, you got yellow too. And these guys would say, why in the hell am I over here fighting Japanese that are yellow, and I'm taking this stuff so that I look like they look, and I'm not going to take it. And I think more and more people were throwing it away than actually were taking it at times. Navy produced a lot of posters. The posters indicated that nothing about the malaria in the Mediterranean area. It was all connected with the South Pacific area. And most of it was comparing things with Japanese. Some places they said that malaria would take 5 military people out of service for everyone that was taken out of service by Japanese. Another place that said 8 were taken out. So I don't know which is which, but obviously more people were not fighting worthy by malaria than it was by the Japanese in many instances, particularly on some of the islands. And the people that I worked with and went to school with at Bethesda, they were all naval personnel who were attached to Marine divisions and things like this. And they landed with the Marines in the South Pacific. And they had horrible duty because they were trying to take care of all the wounds and things of war plus malaria. I'm not necessarily a pacifist, but I didn't really think much about killing people. So I selected the hospital corps and went there for 6 weeks, got out of there, and then you had to do a practicum. And I went to the Brooklyn Naval Hospital for a couple months and got through that all right. And all of a sudden one day I saw a notice that they were going to have this malaria control and sanitation school in Bethesda. And I volunteered for that. As a matter of fact, a young man from middle of Pennsylvania I met and was a good friend with, he was with me through hospital, school, and our Brooklyn experience. So we both signed up for malaria control. And pretty soon they told us that we'd have to go to Bethesda near Washington, D.C. for the classes. We went there, and it's interesting to note that our classes were taught by college professors, and we cussed them out more than once about how tough they were about things that we were doing. The thing about it was that you did that for 3 weeks, and you really had to study. And I'm telling you, if at the end of 3 weeks they gave you all these exams, and if you flunked them, you were out. And my buddy, he flunked, and he got sent to Norfolk, put on a destroyer, went straight across the ocean, got into the Mediterranean. His ship got sunk. He got rescued by an English ship, and they put the English naval uniform on him. He got sent back home, and he never left the state after that. So anyhow, I passed, and I didn't know exactly why or anything, but between high school, which I got out in the spring, and the time that I was going to be 18 and get taken into the Navy, I went to Catherman's Business School. In high school, I was essentially business and mechanical drawing. I really liked that. And the teachers I had actually found some special work for me to do. So I got out of high school with essentially some clerical thing. I could type 125 words a minute. And when I saw this Catherman's Business School, I also learned how to take shorthand. And I didn't realize that I put this stuff all in a paper that when I volunteered for malaria control. And I didn't think any more of it, as a matter of fact. And then whenever we had graduation and they were passing out the official notices of what was going to happen to you, I got on the elevator one day and I was going down, and I guess somebody said something about Ziegler, and I said, yeah, I'm Ziegler. And these two guys looked at me and said, there he is, there he is. Well, what is he? Well, he's the guy who's going to be the third member of this 3-member team to go to the Mediterranean. And the other two guys both had some college and stuff, and I didn't know why I was selected, but I was selected because I could type and I could take shorthand, and I was going to be responsible for all the reports that came out of any place that we essentially worked in the Mediterranean area. We left Norfolk, Virginia, and got onto what was essentially a supply ship. And it was loaded with everything. And it took us 30 days to cross the Atlantic because we were zigzagging back and forth in a convoy. For some reason, I have no idea why, I was selected to head up a group of other sailors to clean different things and to collect the trash. And we had some large cans that had really sticky trash in them. And I had never been around actually a big ship like that. So I thought one thing the ocean could help us clean those cans. We ran a line through the handles, and we're going to throw them over the side of the ship in order to get them clean. And guess what? They acted like anchors. And we hardly knew they were over the side, and all of a sudden a big boom. And the cans were going somewhere, and all we got back were the two handles. And this wasn't as simple a thing as it could have been, because they said you couldn't throw anything over the side of the ship until it got dark, because there were German submarines around, and that would give them an indication of other people in the American convoy going by. So I got a little bit of a lacing down, but I had to continue as the chief of that cleanup crew for the rest of the convoy. Usually when you are on a mission like we were on, Malaria Control Team 104, 3 people, you actually go, you're almost a land-based sailor. And our first shipment was to Naples, Italy. At Naples, Italy, a supply ship had been sunk and almost in the harbor. And what happened, it was full of large cans of all kinds of foods, vegetables, fruits, ketchup, mustard, everything you could possibly think would be needed at a naval base. And a lot of that was salvaged, but they didn't salvage it with the labels on. So basically, what happened was that it was given to us to actually use to feed a bunch of Italian old men that were going to work for us. And somebody promised these guys a quarter of a loaf of bread and a quart of soup every day. And then they dumped a whole truckload of this stuff for us to actually make the soup for these workers. And we had a great big kettle and a fire under it and a line on it so that we knew how much we had to get to give them a quart of soup. And off and on we would open these cans. We never used a whole can of ketchup or mustard or anything like that, but almost everything else was fair game to make this soup. And then these Italians would come with a can to get their quart of soup at lunchtime, and they often looked into the kettle and they said, "Soupa, soupa, is this what you have in USA?" And obviously we had to tell them, yes, that was good soup. It may have looked like tomato soup with peach halves floating in it, but actually they always took it and ate it and took the bread home to their families. When we were working on this below Salerno deal, actually we hired 30 old Italians to come to us and help clean out these ditches. And they used shovels and rakes and whatever they could get a hold of, but they actually walked in the ditches. And in those ditches were all kinds of leeches and every other thing that you could think of. And so this one doctor who came to check on us every once in a while saw this and said that was a dangerous situation, that they should not be in there walking through there with all the leeches and things. So he somehow or other requisitioned some fly fishing boots. And essentially, I don't know how long it took to get them and where he got them, but anyhow, they arrived one day, and we lined up all our workers, and we gave them each a pair of these fishing boots, essentially. That's what they were. And we thought, boy, that's going to be a different situation, and it certainly was. When they showed up at lunchtime to get their quart of soup and quarter loaf of bread, why, none of them had their boots on. And we wondered what the heck happened. Where were their boots? So we followed them back to the ditches after lunch, and we found out that they all had them hanging in trees. Those abandoned wells or streams were actually full of big black eels. And they were catching eels one after the other and sticking them in their boots. And they had their boots full of eels, And that night when they went back on the truck to Salerno, they all had great things to sell for food because lots of food was scarce. And they were right in there with a great thing, I guess. And boy, they never did wear those boots for anything, use them for anything but collecting eels. A lot of people didn't know that the whole Mediterranean area had lots of malaria. And at one time, the Italian race was almost wiped out by malaria. But southern France, all of Italy, Sicily, North Africa, they all had big-time malaria problems. And so what was going to happen was the army was going to cover an area south of Salerno, about 30 miles south of Salerno, and they were going to move in there and get ready for the invasion of southern France. And the trouble was that there were acres and acres of land that was below the sea that had been used as a irrigated farmland. And somehow or other this had been lost from the standpoint of everyday use. And the ditches had all actually become full of vegetation of all kinds, and also mosquitoes breeding. So it was a hot area for malaria. So our team, 104, the three of us were actually asked to get in there, clean it up, dry it up, get rid of the malaria so that the army could come in there and get ready for the invasion of southern France. Since this was below the sea level, there had to be, with excess of water, had to be pumped out into the sea, and there was a large bank along the sea, and on top of that bank was a pump house that they could actually pump the water from the irrigation into the sea. And that was our home for quite a while. Three of us lived there. It had about 3 rooms in it. One of them was a small room with a couple cots that we slept on. One of them was an area to store bags and cans of DDT and all kinds of pesticides. And the other one was just a place where we could eat and do our reports and things like that. And what happened was that we actually used Spangler torpedoes and flamethrowers to get rid of the vegetation and to clean up and dry up the whole area, get rid of the mosquito breeding possibilities. So what happened was that we were about to finish that, and one of our, I would say he was a commissioned officer who was somewhat related to what we would do. He came around every now and then and checked on us. And evidently he was in Salerno one night at an officers club, and they were drinking a few things, and an army man said to him, "There's going to be hell tomorrow. Boy, it's going to be big time stuff." And the other guy said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're taking over that area now, and the first thing we're going to do is have a practice landing, and we're going to blow hell out of that pump house." And our guy said, "Hey, wait a minute, we got 3 guys living in that pump house." And he said, "Well, you better get them the heck out of there because it's not going to be there tomorrow evening." And so all I can remember about this is that a Jeep came running in with its highlights on and its horn blowing, and essentially, "Come on, guys, you got to get the hell out of here." And the one guy I know stood up in front of the lights, and he was in the nude standing there saying, "What, right now?" And they said, "Sure enough," and they got us out of there, and the next day the pump house was no longer there. So actually we could have been, victims of friendly fire. We were actually 3 people in Malaria Team 104. And the top dog was an Italian guy from Brooklyn, actually, whose parents came from Naples. And they evidently spoke Italian, and he went to Columbia and St. John's University. He had degrees from both of those. and he was fluent with Spanish and French and Neapolitan, and essentially was a college graduate with, knew a lot more than I did, actually. I had finished high school, and so he taught me a lot. Michael was with us through the whole 2 years, and actually was something that inspired me to get back home and go to college. I rode home about once a week for every week that I was in the Navy. And my mother and father collected everything. And so these things were all stacked, and when I got home, I found them. And they were pretty much the story of what was going on. Obviously, they couldn't be perfectly that, because wherever you were during the war, before the 1945 end of the war in Europe, everything had to be censored. And basically, that was something that we kind of got into in a bad way, too, because Mike Serenero carried a 4x5 speed graphic camera all the time that we were overseas, and he took lots of photographs. Basically, his wife would send him the paper and what he needed from home, with the exception of the developer and the fixer that he would appropriate from the local X-ray units, sick bay. So we got pretty good at making those, and again, we got in trouble over this, because when we got to Port Leoti in French Morocco, we found a house that was empty that we could turn into a really nice laboratory with microscopes and everything. And he got some pieces of a downed airplane, and he made a bellows and a thing for his camera that he could make any kind of photographs. And he did. And we got away with this for a while, because we could also take photographs of the malaria slides that we were making. And whenever there was an inspection, we would throw a lot of these around on the tables, and the inspecting officers were always convinced that what we were doing was absolutely necessary for our malaria work. And again, one time we got into trouble, because we not only had those, but we had some photographs of the Cebu River and the Port Leoti airfields and everything. And another one of our officers, who got us into trouble by going to an officers' club one night and showing all these photographs off. And then one of the officers said, "Oh, they're great. Where did you get these?" "Oh, that's no problem. I got a couple guys working in the malaria lab. They can make anything." And they usually do. Well, guess what? The next morning we were raided, and our photo lab had to be, what you'd say, destroyed maybe, so that for a while we didn't have any more pictures to make about what was going on. And some of the ones that we did get away with should have been censored. There was no question about it. But we kept them long enough to bring them home after the war and have them, so that there are photographs that actually would not have gotten out of the Navy otherwise. While we were in Morocco, we were a little bit different than most of the personnel. Most of the personnel had port and starboard liberty, which meant every other day you could go someplace, and every other weekend and things like this. But we had the liberty to go out and do things everywhere in the area, because we were fighting mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes were every place around the base. So basically, we could go almost any place and any time. And they did have a enlisted man's bar and grill in the town of Port Leoti. And it was interesting. They brought beer over, lots of beer in cans, and some guys were drinking a half a can and then leaving it. And there was one time, I think it was Duquesne beer, they said, if you don't quit wasting this beer, there's going to be nothing but Duquesne you're going to get in the future. There were other things that, obviously, girly houses and things that guys would get off base and go to. And again, at every station that we were in, there was a big problem with venereal diseases. And some guys brought a lot of things home that they should have left over there. There's no question about that. After a while, we ended up, for most of our time, in the area in French Morocco, Port Leoti. And there we got a chance to put into practice everything we had learned in malaria control and sanitation school. And then came the opportunity. The armies had passed Rome, and Rome was not blown to pieces. It was saved through the war. And the Army had taken over the old, I think it was 1936, area of the Summer Olympics. And they had turned it into an R&R situation where mainly soldiers were kept for a while before they came back to the States. And the thing about it was that they offered the opportunity for some naval people to get there, and I got the opportunity to get on a plane and fly to Rome. And I could fly there for about a week, and I didn't have any money. But in those days, in the Navy, you could buy a carton of cigarettes for 50 cents at the naval stores, and if you were getting $64 a month pay, you could spend 50 cents for a carton of cigarettes and sell it any place in North Africa or Italy or southern France for the equivalent of $20 in local currency. As usual, I didn't know where to get 3 cartons of cigarettes for 50 cents a carton, but Mike Serenero had everything under control. And for $1.50, he got me 3 cartons of cigarettes, and I got my pack of toothbrushes and hair combs and all this stuff. And I had to beg a flight from Port Leoti to Rome. And I got there for 7 days. As usual, Michael had visited Rome on many occasions, and he told me where to go. First of all, you got to see an opera. And I saw Japanese opera, Madame Butterfly, in Italian. So I didn't understand much about what was going on, obviously. I saw the tomb of Victor Emmanuel. I saw the Colosseum. I went every place that he recommended that I go to see. And it was a great time because essentially the whole area was full of R&R Army people. And every one of them would see you, and there were only about 3 of us sailors there, and they would say, "Hey, Bob, you're going to take us home. Would you like a beer?" So we never had any trouble getting enough to drink, and we never had to pay for it. We went out one night, and these guys told me, "Oh, you know, you have to go to this basement restaurant. It is really great." Well, I thought, okay, we'll go and see what's in there. I had my first pizza, tomato pie, in the basement of a restaurant in Rome. And I should have come home like a few of my friends and neighbors and opened up a pizzeria, but I didn't get that done.